Killing is often unexpected, and most assume murderers spend their lives in prison. However, some of history's most vicious criminals met brutal deaths behind bars. Rivalries between drug dealers and fatal stabbings are just a few examples. Number 1. Donald Harvey. Distant relatives of Harvey knew him as later as March 30, 1996, an American serial killer who was active between 1970 and 1987. Before he was arrested, he was known primarily as the Angel of Death. Harvey himself confessed to murdering 87 persons, of which he was only formally charged with 37 counts. Thus began the long, murderous career of Harvey, whose murderous years ranged from 1970 to 1987. When he was employed in Kentucky and Ohio as an orderly and nurse aide, he was preying on hospital patients. Harvey was just 18 years when he started acting as a hospital assistant at the Marymount Hospital in London at Kentucky, and within 10 months he had killed about a dozen people. Harvey used a mix of chilling methods to end his victims' lives. He poisoned some with arsenic and cyanide, either through their food or injections, while others were given deadly doses of insulin. At times, he would suffocate patients or mess with their life support systems. In more extreme cases, he contaminated IV fluids with hepatitis B or even caused fatal damage by pushing a coat hanger into a catheter. For 17 years, Harvey avoided getting caught. His downfall came in March 1987 when John Powell, a coma patient from a motorcycle accident, died suddenly. An autopsy found cyanide in Powell's system, making Harvey the main suspect. Things got worse when it was revealed that he had been fired from a hospital for theft involving strange practices with human remains. When questioned by the police, Harvey confessed to killing Powell and many others, claiming he was trying to relieve them of their suffering. In August 1987, Harvey admitted to killing 24 people and was given 3 life sentences. He later confessed to 9 more murders, bringing the total to 37, though he hinted the real number could be around 50. On March 28, 2017, Harvey was found beaten badly in his cell. He died 2 days later from his injuries, the result of an attack by another inmate. Number 2. Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez, infamously known as the Night Stalker, terrorized Southern California between 1984 and 1985, committing a series of brutal crimes. In just 14 months, Ramirez murdered 13 people, sexually assaulted 11 women, and committed numerous other violent offenses, including break-ins and attempted murders. His erratic and random choice of victims, combined with his sheer brutality, plunged communities into fear and panic. Ramirez was known for his unpredictability. He used various weapons, ranging from guns and knives to his bare hands, leaving no clear pattern in his attacks, which made him difficult for law enforcement to track down. Adding to the horror was his lack of remorse, and he would often leave a pentagram, a symbol associated with Satanism, at the crime scenes. During his trial, his defiance was on full display as he smirked at reporters and flashed a pentagram tattoo on his hand, showing no remorse for his heinous acts. Ramirez was eventually apprehended in August 1985 after residents in East Los Angeles recognized him from media reports. The community banded together, chased him down, and restrained him until police arrived. Ramirez was convicted in 1989 and sentenced to death for his crimes. He spent years on death row but ultimately died on June 7, 2013, from complications related to B-cell lymphoma, a form of cancer. Number 3. Charles Schmid. Known as the Pied Piper of Tucson, Charles Schmid was a strange and dangerous figure who terrorized Arizona in the 1960s. Standing at only 5'3", Schmid wore large cowboy boots stuffed with rags to make himself appear taller and dyed his hair black while drawing a fake mole on his face to seem more intimidating. However, his bizarre appearance paled in comparison to the horrors he would commit. In 1964, Schmid murdered 15-year-old Aileen Rowe with the help of his girlfriend, Mary French, and friend, John Saunders. Schmid lured Aileen into the desert under the pretense of a fun outing, but once there, he ended her life and buried her in a shallow grave. The murder, chillingly, was motivated by Schmid's desire to know what it felt like to kill someone. Schmid's next targets were the Fritz sisters, Gretchen and Wendy. In August of 1965, Charles Schmid took the life of 17-year-old Gretchen Fritz, who had been in a secret relationship with him. His motive was to prevent her from exposing his crimes. To ensure no witnesses remained, Schmid also killed Gretchen's younger sister, 13-year-old Wendy Fritz. He buried their bodies in the desert, just as he had done with his first victim. Despite his efforts to cover up the murders, Schmid became increasingly paranoid about the graves being discovered. He confided in his friend Richard Bruns, even taking him to the burial sites, which ultimately led to his downfall. Bruns, disturbed by Schmid's behavior and revelations, fled to Ohio and informed the authorities. Initially skeptical, the police were convinced after Bruns guided them to the grave sites. Schmid's arrest followed, and in 1966, he was convicted of the murders. His trial drew significant public attention due to his eerie persona and the grisly nature of his crimes. Schmid was initially sentenced to death, but this was later commuted to a 50-year prison sentence. However, prison life for Schmid was short-lived. In 1975, he was brutally attacked by fellow inmates who stabbed him multiple times. Despite surviving the initial assault, Schmid died from his injuries shortly afterward. Number 4. Albert DeSalvo. Albert DeSalvo, widely believed to be the Boston Strangler, terrorized the Boston area between 1962 and 1964. His victims were single women aged between 19 and 85, whom he attacked in their homes. Despite intense efforts by law enforcement, the identity of the Boston Strangler remained a mystery until March 1965, when DeSalvo, a Massachusetts inmate, confessed to the killings. However, because there was no physical evidence linking him to the crimes, he was never formally charged as the Strangler. Instead, DeSalvo was sentenced to life imprisonment for unrelated offenses. The question of whether DeSalvo was truly the Boston Strangler persisted for decades. In 2013, advances in DNA testing shed new light on the case. A DNA test conducted on evidence from Mary Sullivan, the final victim of the Strangler, matched the DNA of DeSalvo's nephew, indicating a familial connection and strengthening the belief that DeSalvo was the killer. After being sentenced to life, DeSalvo escaped from Bridgewater State Hospital in 1967, along with 2 other inmates. In a note he left behind, he claimed the escape was intended to expose the poor conditions at the facility. DeSalvo remained on the run for 3 days before surrendering to the authorities through his lawyer. He was transferred to a maximum security prison in Walpole, Massachusetts. On November 25, 1973, DeSalvo was found stabbed to death in the prison infirmary. Robert Wilson, a fellow inmate with alleged ties to the Winter Hill Gang, was charged with his murder, but the trial ended in a hung jury and Wilson was acquitted. There were suspicions that DeSalvo's death was connected to his involvement in selling amp-aw mines at a price undercutting the prison's internal drug trade. Number 5. Thor Christensen. During the late 1970s, a string of murders known as the look-alike killings sent shockwaves through the University of California at Santa Barbara. Several female students with similar appearances, long straight hair and a particular body type, went missing, only to be found later, shot in the head in remote locations. The disappearances of women such as Jacqueline Rook, Mary Saris, and Patricia Laney terrified the community. The breakthrough in the case came in 1979 when Lydia Preston, a 24-year-old woman, survived an attack. She had been shot in the ear by a man who had offered her a ride. Despite her injuries, Preston identified her attacker at a local bar, leading to the arrest of Thor Christensen, a local resident who had previously been questioned but not considered a suspect. In 1980, Christensen was charged with the murder of Laura Benjamin in Santa Monica. He initially attempted an insanity defense, but ultimately confessed to the crime. Found guilty, he was sentenced to life in prison. Just a few months into his sentence, Christensen was attacked and killed in the prison yard on March 30, 1981. These notorious killers, whose lives behind bars ended violently, serve as stark reminders of the brutal realities within the prison system. Even in maximum security facilities, where they were isolated from the public they once terrorized, danger still loomed. Whether it was revenge, personal vendettas, or the chaotic nature of prison life itself, these criminals met the kind of violence they once inflicted on others. These stories offer a chilling glimpse into the world of high-profile criminals whose reigns of terror didn't end with their convictions, but with their own violent and untimely deaths behind bars.